saying good morning. Thanks to all the institutions and other guests for being here. I think we do have a forum now. Mr. Hinton will not be joining us, but I'm officially called the meeting to order today. The first agenda item is the chair's report, and majority of the items which are on the agenda are items that we've been talking about the last month. The one item that we will not be talking about today, but we're planning to have a joint meeting with the Participation Success Committee, is to have further conversations about the HEI recommendation, which was presented to us at our last board meeting. So we're hoping to do that. We hope in a couple of weeks or 3 weeks, I think. Besides that, there's no new business to report. The next agenda item is agenda item 2C, which is approval of minutes from the July 11th, 2008 meeting. Could I have a motion for approval? Ms. Phillips, second. Second by Ms. Mendoza. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. All those opposed by the same sign. The next item is do we have another set of minutes?
July 11th.
Okay. How about a motion for June 12th? Okay, Mr. Hillsdale's. Second by Ms. Mendoza. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. All those opposed by the same sign. Thanks for keeping me honest. We're going to next move into agenda item 2D, which are the projects for approval. And the next item is the first project is a request from UT El Paso to construct the College of Health Sciences and School of Nursing building. And Greg McNichol, welcome. UT El Paso is here to give an overview of the project. West, yes,
Good afternoon. As the agenda item states, we're here to talk to you about the College of Health Sciences School of Nursing project. This project is located on the southern end of the campus, as shown on the delineation over there. Currently on this side, we've got some old tennis courts that this building is replaced at that location. We've also will be demolishing a small student health center that's located on that single-story duplex that will be located. Next slide. This building will contain about 4 stories. It will contain classrooms, offices, some research area, and about a 20,000 square foot simulation lab, which is used in the nursing program in particular for allowing the students to learn how to play with mannequins. These are high-tech mannequins. Next slide. The building is in the Bhutanese fashion. We've got Laxol windows, 2-bar band, which is a red brick band, and our sloping walls. This is a view from the Interstate 10 looking back at it. This kind of shows the library in the background to the right behind the building. It's going to give you a place for those that are familiar with the campus. Next slide. This is from the campus side, if you will, of the this is off of William Street. This is, again, picking up on the Bhutanese Laxol window, the courtyard feel on the interior of this one. This program does like to run a lot of exterior functions, and this is a great space for them to do that in. This building will address the growing space needs of both these 2 educational units, the nursing program and the College of Health Sciences, create a much better learning and research environment for 2,500 undergraduate and graduate students in this program. And I'm here to answer questions.
2E, there's 9 projects today for committee action. And the first of these projects is a project from Tarleton State University to construct a dairy center. Virgil Gay, I think, is here with me. I know you are. How are you doing? Good afternoon, everyone. Tarleton State University is requesting approval of a new dairy center. It's going to be constructed on its agricultural center lands on the northeast side of Stephenville. It's planned to be a state-of-the-art dairy center that will foster collaborative learning and research in dairy operations and productivity between the private sector and the public education programs across the state, national and international. Initial center development is planned to include there will be a freestall cattle barn for 600 cows. That will contain a freestall cattle area to be naturally ventilated or power cross ventilated, and an animal metabolism room, feed storage area. There will be a milking parlor, rotary robotic and standard milking machine, observation library room, offices, cattle holding pens. And phase 1 of the classroom laboratory building will be built at this time, with more later to come. And waste management facilities, including waste treatment within. This is a typical freestyle barn that we show here. We talked about the preliminary layout, and in this type of barn, as part of this project that we totally designed yet, is the preliminary design for it. The sidewalls can be raised or lowered depending on the season, weather conditions, and you'll have power cross ventilated barn, which will have large fans mounted in the sidewalls to cool air across the stalls. This is a photograph of the interior of a typical freestall barn, as I mentioned earlier. And here's an extra photograph of a particular milking parlor. This is a typical interior photograph of a rotary milking parlor setup. Under the current schedule, the dairy center will begin construction in October of 2009, with substantial completion in May of 2010. Environmental clearances and operating permits for the facility will be obtained from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ, and other applicable agencies. Permitting and clearance are items that could have significant impact on the schedule. Total budget for the project is $11,124,000, and funding source for the project is tuition credit bonds. Are there any questions? Wait, how many committee members are on there? That's more than I would have ever guessed. That's more than I would have guessed. So, I can't raise my hand up. That's all you
It was utterly interesting.
No,
I built the cow. That is interesting.
One thing I've seen here, Virgil, was an issue about the space surplus. Yes. And I think staff had said that there was, obviously, y'all thought about it, July of 2011, there'd be sufficient student enrollment, so that would not be an issue anymore. Is that tracking what current enrollment growth is right now in school? Is there anything unusual that's going to happen between now and 2011, or is that mirroring what we're seeing in historical growth in Tarleton? Personally, I don't have the information on historical growth for Tarleton. I do have with
Spaces in the building will include a concert hall, practice and rehearsal spaces, classrooms, practice studios, administrative offices, and instructional studios. The building also includes shelf space for a future recital hall on the first level and a balcony for the concert hall, about 3,800 square feet of shelf space total. The university chose to include the shelf space to take advantage of current pricing and to respond to the projected growth in music students and program offerings. Over the next several years, cash funds will be accumulated to finish out the shelf space. This is a perspective of the building here, looking to the northwest. The exterior skin is primarily the masonry and glass wall with some metal panels. The appearance will be compatible with the existing campus architecture. And the project will be constructed in an existing parking lot, eliminating about 161 construction in January of 2009 with user occupancy in August of 2010. Total budget for the project is $29,677,000. The funding sources are tuition revenue bonds and higher education funds. Or the question for this project. Susan, would you speak to the exception?
Okay, on the first exception, which is the space surplus, they are going to be demolishing actually two buildings. One is their old music building, and another is the kids that are paying for demolish. So that basically will take out the space for when they demolish those. Of course, the music building won't be demolished till this one comes on.
Is the old student center being used right now, or is it?
I don't believe it is.
Is it yours being used, but they're starting to decommission it? Okay, so
There's a new student center already that's
yes.
The other one is the shell space, and but it still only gets up to the 55, and I believe you have somebody here from Commerce that may be able to answer.
Well, actually, they have a plan to build out the shell space. That's concurrent with finishing the project.
But it does also only get them up to the 55.8%.
Right, right.
So we would like to proceed toward that one.
In terms of the efficiency of the building. And one of the things about this building I would like to point out, and Jim is the campus university architect, sure with me. But one of the things I want to point out about this project is this project contains a lot of what we call large spaces and large passageways, because they will be transporting pianos, large bass drums, timpani, instruments, and things like that. And as the building was designed, we had to make allowances for that, as well as having large storage spaces to put some of these things in when they're not in use. I think there's not only the performance thing when you look at marching band and all the things that they have. So the building's designed to be highly functional, to have ease and flow for large amounts of students and large instruments at different individual times. Plus, because it is a performance space, there is a nice entryway in the space, a fairly substantial lobby that will be used for other occasions by the university for different events and things like that. So all of those, when you go into it, make it very difficult to meet some of the efficiency standards. It's just a certain different type of building that he's building.
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing, that the music program at Commerce, although the enrollment's relatively small, projected enrollment, campus at 250, one of the main ingredients in the music program is that all of the students are trained to be, or have to have a performance component in their education, whether they're going into the performance option or music education, which is a big program at Commerce. With 250 majors, the requirement to have performance space so that all these kids can get in, have their performances, have rehearsal time, just demands an inordinately large amount of performance space that drives circulation, lobbies, and that sort of thing. So once we have finished out, I believe that this almost 56%, given the type of building and function, is relatively efficient for that type of building.
Thanks, Les. Thank you for questions. I can have a motion for approval. Second by Mr. Mills. All those in favor, indicate by saying aye. All opposed, by saying
okay. Now, Virgil, Kingsville construct student housing.
All right. Texas A&M University Kingsville, they're requesting approval of new student housing on their campus. The existing housing on the campus is 40 to 50 years old at this point. It is much very worn condition and does not really reflect the current trends of student housing, nor in some instances does it comply with current codes and building occupancy guidelines. The Martin Park Style additional housing will be constructed in the western portion of the campus on the original site of the Merit Student Housing, as shown on this location map here. Merit Student Housing has already been demolished by the university through a separate project. Comparable housing for provided to the students who were located in this demolished housing area. The new student housing will be 3- and 4-story wood frame structure with brick and cement stucco exterior finish. The housing will provide, as you see here, this is some of the floor plan, the two typical floor plan layouts that we have. Provide 600 beds and 104 bedroom 2-bath units and 100 2-bedroom 1-bath units with layouts as shown on the slide here. Each unit will contain a living area and a kitchenette. The housing complex will also contain administrative offices, common areas for recreational and lounge use, multi-purpose classrooms, exercise room, and a laundry. This is the perspective of the complex looking west at the visitor entry complex here. Next one, please. This is an additional perspective from the inside courtyard looking to the northeast. This is a bird's eye aerial view of the entire complex looking from the southwest. Part for the project will be provided by existing parking lots nearby. Under the current project schedule, new housing began construction in October of 2008 with user occupancy in August of 2009. The budget for the project is $35 million. Now, funding is revenue financing debt proceeds that will be retired utilizing housing revenue. I might say this would be a great addition to this campus.
I feel this on first year.
Yes, the students are extremely excited about this new housing complex.
Questions?
What's happening with some of the older housing? The older housing is just, it was built in a different way. A lot of it was built, some of the traditional things where you had, rock and that kind of thing. I'm sorry. This is the first step in future sort of replacement of the current housing stock.
So once this is online, some of the housing.
Yes, it will be. In fact, we're looking at the unit across the street from it as the next step. And over time, the university plans to replace most of its current housing. Questions?
I'd like to have a motion for approval. Mr. Oakville's all in favor of giving us that.
All right, thank you very much.
The next project is a request from Texas Tech. Mike, welcome. And this is to talk about expansion to the Jones Stadium.
I think I need to ask you.
You killed my pony, so better than that.
So you had a little bit of help from higher above because we had a foot of water on our field Friday morning. We had 8 inches of rain in Lubbock. We had 6 months worth of rain on Thursday, and it overwhelmed our pumps. We were, with the help of the Lubbock Fire Department, we were able to overcome that. Your quarterback did very well, sir. He had a high completion percentage.
Yeah, he did about the same.
Yeah, 5 of them were to us. Yes, sir. Moving right along.
I'll say that joke until
Yes, sir. I think I need to ask how many people have been in a football stadium. I have not had the pleasure of it very far. But our football stadium is located in the northwest corner of our campus. This is actually a slice out of our master planning drawing that we're updating for the campus. As you can see, there were a couple of options for how to expand the stadium, and we've sort of taken a hybrid of both options. This is a view of the scenic east side of our stadium. Those of you that have seen the Spanish Renaissance on the west side can understand the phone calls the Chancellor has been getting ever since we completed the west side of the stadium. Next slide. So our scope of work is at about a 61,000 gross square foot building. Right now we're showing 26 suites and 540 club seats. And on the ground level, we will reserve space. We'll have as an alternate fit out of that ground floor as the ticket office and the Red Raider Club as our spirit club, and those two organizations work pretty closely together. We've got some site utility infrastructure work, parking revisions, some repairs to the existing stadium bowl, and we dedicate 1% for landscape enhancements and 1% for public art projects, and a project budget of $25 million. Next slide. This is an early rendering of what the east side will look like. It's again our Spanish Renaissance architectural style, significant improvement over what's there now. Next slide. And there is our rendering, aerial rendering. This is the east side building right here. That's kind of looking from the outside of the building. And the next one is looking from the field side, and in a what I would call a blinding flash of the obvious. There's another reason why the cost per square foot is so high is those two light poles there cost $175,000 a piece. So that's also included in that, and all the infrastructure that goes with it to make that work. Light poles, okay. Yes, sir. Probably both. Hopefully not wind turbines, however. Next slide. Here's the project budget. Shown is here. The contingency works out to be about 5% of the cost of construction, site development, and professional services, which is generally, given the level of design we're at, is what we feel to be an appropriate amount. Next slide. We want to start construction in November. Groundbreaking is the morning of the last football game, November 29th, if anyone's in Lubbock. And we want to be complete by the 2010 season. My chancellor has challenged me to have something open to sit in by the start of next season. I'm hopeful. There's the coordinating board criteria. As noted in the briefing sheet, it does not meet the cost per square foot. And I'll talk about that in a second. It meets all the other ones except for, obviously, our classroom utilization. We are continuing to work on that and refine that. Next slide. The three reasons why, plus the cost of the light fixture, field lights being in there. The building is 5 stories high, but it only has 3 floors, fit-out floors. There's space for the second and third floor eventually to add the structure and be fit out, but there's nothing in there now, so I've got 2 stories of building surface to pay for. We've got an additional elevator and an escalator, a fairly pricey escalator in the building. And obviously, since we are selling the club seats and the suites to donors to generate revenue, the level of fit and finish in those areas is pretty high. And I think that contributes to the cost of the high cost per square foot of our building. Next slide. So we would ask that the committee approve this project. It's a project budget of $25 million. It's funded primarily with gifts and donations, about $16 million of which are in hand. The revenue finance system will spread out gifts given over time. Plus, we have bonded the revenue from those clubs and club seats and suites to help pay for this building. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
What is the debt coverage ratio of the suite club?
Yes, sir. We have conservatively estimated that we'll be able, over the 20 years, sell half of the club seats and half of the suites. So if there's any revenue generated over that, that will go to athletic operations.
So you're saying 50% occupancy?
No, sir. There's, I think it's about $3.5 million of the remaining debt is covered by the sale of the club seats and the suites. And the difference, the rest of the money is we're having a $6.1 million capital campaign right now. We just got $1 million. And part of the condition is starting construction on November 29th is having the donations to support that. But the revenue contribution to that $25 million debt, we can do it if we only sell half of the club seats and suites, or at least half the club seats and suites. Yes, sir. I should have been listening Friday night on the next table, but I think we had a waiting list of 14 for the suites on the west side, and I think they've managed to convince most of those people to take an east side suite while waiting, and I'm not sure where we are in club seats.
And what will be the total passenger side?
gets us up seats, probably 55. It has about 1,100 seats, so we'll be at 55,100 roughly, and high capacity at 57,000 stadium seats and some grass seats, grassy areas. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. We hope so. I'll pass that on to the football coach. I'm pretty sure we can.
Any other questions? I can have a motion for approval, Mr. Phillips. Second. All those in favor, indicate by saying aye. All those opposed, by the same sign. Ayes, fine. Thank you. Next project for committee approval is from UT Austin to renovate and maintain Texas Memorial Stadium with Bob Dombrowski. Who else? We got. I thought we got three.
I'll do the introduction.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Roski. I am the Austin Program Manager with UT Central BC. And Dave wants to be here today. He's one of the assistant coaches with us. He asked that we press on. And with me today is Mike Uedas, the Project Manager of Pulsar BC. And in the audience we have David Ray, who's the Director of Campus Planning with UT Austin. power side is we have one of the projects is to install a Chrysler 13 megawatt combustion turbine, 1965. And you have 34 megawatts in our combustion turbine system. We'll be estimated with the campus. We self-produce 100% of campus combustion turbine. We self-produce almost the cooling needs of the campus as well. So it's the largest CHP system. We also, these projects, because they are more efficient, they improve our campus environmental footprint. Basically, the more efficient you are, the less fuel you consume for the energy you produce. And the TES system as well is also a very it's environmentally friendly because what we're basically doing is we're leveraging the existing chiller system. Right across one of the projects we're doing is to install a new 50,000 chiller plant. And so this helps us use that most efficient plant at night to make the chill water at night, and then we turn on and use that chill water in the evening periods. So we avoid having to add new refrigerants to campus because it's more efficient as well. Go to the next slide, please. This is the small the projects are located. The upper right-hand side is chill station 4, and the lower left-hand side is chill station 3. That's where the two chillers for the water rising. And the thermal energy storage tank is located in the parking lot of one of our substations between the law school and the parking garage. And the combustion turbine project is located on 24th and San Jacinto Street, right alongside Water Street. If you go to the next slide, please. This shows the thermal energy storage project side. It's basically a tank. It's 4 million gallons. And it's basically taking up that parking lot. It's a very good site for us on campus because it's very low to the campus. And it's basically covered by a bunch of trees around it. The trees are right next to it. The rest of the time it's hidden from pretty much anyone on campus. You cannot see it. What you see on the left-hand side, on the bottom side, there are two 42-inch diameter lines that are those are actually going to be bored directly from this site over to 24th and Skidway, 1,500 feet, 50 feet underground, just on the bottom. And that's actually covered by the ESP project. And the ESP project is really one of the primary reasons that caused us to increase the size and cost of this project. Our original intent was to route it through existing tunnel systems that already were there in place to the chill station that's just to the north of this plant. But because of this big load for ESP, it forced us to have to put figure out a new way to get that chill water to that building, circle goes back to campus for that building. And it also helps to circumvent the part of the campus. If you go to the next slide. This shows the building that's going to contain our new combustion turbine. Where the tank is just to this side of the street that runs here on this side over here, San Jacinto Street, and that's 24th Street. And the turbine is basically getting contained entirely inside that building. If you go to the next slide, just get a good perspective. It's going to go inside that building. There's a three-dimensional model versus some of this that we're actually using to design the system. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that small building. But so far we're doing very well in this project. We've purchased all the equipment already for the system. This is the summary of the projects. We can say it's a series of projects, the combustion turbine projects, about 1.2 million. The modernizations is about 3.8 million. The water storage tank was originally with Chancellor approval to additional 10% of $7 million, and then intro financing. So it's $54 million that includes PPC increase from Chancellor. So we're asking for an increase of 3.7 million for the energy storage project, brings us over 57.7 million. Way fast. So that was a clear heading as if we have to answer any questions.
Slide that shows the gas savings.
Yes, sir.
$8 heavy. Over what period of time?
That's annual savings. That's annual savings that will occur. We basically have financed these projects for 30 years, and so throughout the project, the
savings actually, as long as it stays $8 or above, actually, as long as it stays above $6 or above, the savings more than exceed the cost of the project, of the financing. So these are annual savings.
Almost 3.7 per year.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's straight line paybacks around 16 years.
I guess that's what I was going to ask you. 16 years for the whole.
For this phase, this portion of this project.
Savings are attributed to $250,000 cost. Or let me rephrase that. Are these savings numbers going up because of the increase?
In actuality, they have, because of additional technology we were able to put in the Chilton Station project in one, and then also because of additional technology we put into the combustion turbine project. They've already been worked into the process, and by being able to discharge the chill water, in fact, more effectively actually, to the middle part of the campus, not only does it serve a critical reliability issue, it provides additional savings as well. So these costs have definitely helped firm up the savings. These are actually increased savings over what we had originally projected.
What the differences between these savings and the original?
Oh, I'm trying to remember. It's around $200,000 more, approximately a year. That's my recollection.
Is the major reason for the expansion scope because you increase the scope of the ESB building?
Well, what happened is the ESB project, when we originally proposed the project and got approval on the project, we knew that project was coming, but we did not expect the amount of load that building was going to actually have. And so we had made plans, we knew it was coming, but we didn't know it was going to be as big a load. And the infrastructure that is in the place that serves that building isn't sufficient to serve that load. So in order to be able to support that building, we had to figure out another way to get this chill water to that building. And this was the best way for us to do this. The tank was already in process, so now it's just simply a matter of getting the water to it.
Any other questions? Now, can I have a motion for approval? Glenn, motion. Second. Wayne.
Thank you
All
very
those
much.
in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the same sign. Thank you. Thank you very much. The next project for committee approval is a request from UT Permian Basin to construct the Wagner Mill Performing Arts Center. And we have a supplemental yellow rod. Okay. And David Watts, welcome David, with UT Permian Basin here to present the project today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this project with you. Your first slide just gives you an overview of where the UTPB Odessa campus is located and where the SEED campus is located, where the Wagner Noel Performing Arts Center is planned for construction. The architects, construction manager are indicated. Total project costs, $81 million. The total building costs, $52.8 million. Financing, $45 million from tuition revenue bonds, $12.5 million from Permian University Fund. Gifts and donations dedicated to the construction portion of the project are $16 million, and those are gifts and donations in hand, either pledges or cash. We anticipate another $4 to $8 million more will be raised by the time the building opens. And $7.5 million in grants from, in this case, from Texas Department of Highways. Not listed here are the costs of bringing the utilities to the site for the building, primarily water and sewer. The city of Midland is fully absorbing all costs associated with bringing water and sewer to the facility, and are not included in any way in the costs here. Notice to proceed, we're optimistic we'll get one by December 2008 with completion by 2011 and grand opening in January of 2012. Next slide shows the topside view of the Performing Arts Center on the left-hand side. The upper left-hand quadrant is the recital hall and other academic spaces, which I'll talk more about in a moment. On the right-hand side is the performance facility and various support spaces associated with that. Next slide, please. 97,000 gross square feet, 58,000 assignable. Based on our calculations, approximately 29,700 square feet are E&G. That figure was derived at based on our consultants' projected utilization of the facility. We included only those activities that would be appropriate for E&G. Auditorium is 1,800 seats, 200-seat recital hall, which will be actively used by our music program at UTPB, 1,000 parking places. Presently, there are only about 200 parking places located at the seed facility, so this will be necessary to be able to support the Performing Arts Center. The next slide shows a cutaway of the facility. Fairly clear. The lobby will be used for a variety of activities in addition to, of course, space prior to any performance. Another cutaway showing the interior of the facility. And then finally, very beautiful, if I could get the next slide, please, and the next one. Beautiful presentation of what the design will look like. And I can answer any questions you might have about that. The next slide shows the same design from at night. The design reflects very much the geography and the value of the resources, primarily mineral resources, in West Texas. Next slide, please. Project cost drivers. We all acknowledge that the cost for this project was much more than anyone anticipated going into it. I always feel like that I'm inadequate to describe the nature of the economy in West Texas at this time. My last tour of duty in Texas was during the 1980s, and I can remember when I lived in San Marcos, hiring a geophysicist PhD from Boston to come and build some stone steps at my house, because that's what geophysicists could do in those days. We all know that the situation has changed, and while it's easy for us to acknowledge that it's changed, we know that while oil is down off its high of $145 a barrel, it's still just under $100 a barrel. Those prices are almost impossible, I think, for most of us to realize. We've lived with over 20 years in Texas with a bust oil economy, as opposed to just a year or two with a boom oil economy. The consequences for the economy in our area are extraordinary. One bullet mentions that we're 300 miles away from the nearest large city. We are. Midland, Odessa is the largest city in our area, and it's 2.5 hours to 3 hours by car to any other large city. In-migration into the community is not kept up with growth, and so as a result, the oil exploration industry and the oil services industry continues to attract from the existing workforce. We're finding all of our staff at the university, in order to be retained, have to be offered much more in compensation that they would if they were working in almost any other metro area in the state of Texas. Construction workers are being hired by the oil and gas services industry. Even where we are located, the seed facility, there are over 24 wells that are projected to be drilled within the next year and a half on this property, not the exact acreage set aside for the seed for the Performing Arts Center, but in the surrounding acreage. And the problem is, why aren't they drilling them all at once? Because there are not enough rigs to be able to drill them simultaneously. They have to be done consecutively. The lowest unemployment rate in the state of Texas, and that's not just 1 month, that is over the past 2 years, the lowest unemployment rate in the state of Texas. Only 70 miles away from us, just across the border in New Mexico, now I mean literally across the border in New Mexico, the National Enrichment Facility is building the nation's first privately owned nuclear enrichment facility. Over 700 workers are living on that site in dormitory-like facilities. If you can imagine a whole series of manufactured homes collapsed together into a dormitory-like facility, that's what they have in Eunice, New Mexico. Why are they doing that? Simply because there isn't the workforce in the area necessary to be able to do the kind of construction that has to be done on that project. Our project is no different. So there are very real costs that our contracting construction manager at risk have identified that have simply driven the costs up at a much higher rate than what any of us would have liked to have seen. As a result, we have downsized the project substantially. We downsized it from 2,000 seats to 1,800 seats, and as been previously mentioned by a presenter, that simply downsized the whole project, from the lobby to the restroom facilities, all the plumbing, all the electrical, all the air conditioning. That was a substantial cost savings. The other cost savings that was done is that we've pulled the academic space, with the exception of the recital hall, as an ad alternate as we go through the bidding process, and I can talk more about that if you wish. The next slide shows that indeed that other entities within our area are experiencing similar problems, whether the local independent school districts with their continuing construction expansion. It took Ector County Independent School District almost 5 years to complete a project that was originally slated to take only 2 and cost more money than what they had set aside in their bonds. The nature of performing arts building construction, it's something similar to building an experimental science building. They're unique. The crafts that are necessary to build them are not available, at least in the local market, and will require the substantial importation of substantial number of workers, as well as the contractors providing per diem for them to be able to complete the project. I'm hesitant, I know you would be too, to wish that we would have an economic downturn in West Texas. Nonetheless, should that occur, we will be well positioned to take advantage of opportunities and to either add the academic space back in or reduce the cost for the construction of the building. The next slide shows the economic metrics associated with it. I think probably the most important metrics that you're concerned with would be, if I were in your position, is why does this project not meet the standards that you all have set? And they're very reasonable standards, and there are 2 or 3 of them that we have not met. I'd like to deal with the easiest one first. There is some critical deferred maintenance that we have just completed at the university. In May of 2008, we completed the air conditioning installation that was listed on our critical deferred maintenance. So that is taken care of, and then our report, our MP2 report, that will be filed in October of this year, that will show that that criterion has been met. The other criterion, I've already addressed the question about about the cost per square foot. Let me add a couple of other points. First, as I've already indicated, we've attracted $20 million in pledged and received gifts. 16 million of those gifts are donated to the construction. The remaining 4 million and other funds yet to be raised will be used to create a permanent operating endowment for this facility that will reduce substantially any kind of cost to the university or to the state for its operation. That's point number one. Point number two, with regard to the $20 million that we've raised, while there are some elements associated with this facility that are perhaps add-ons in comparison to other facilities, boxes, for example, we felt that those were important elements to add in order to attract the kind of gift funding that we've been able to receive for the facility. And that gift funding is substantial, represents a good 25% of the total cost of the project in hand, with more projected to be raised. And then finally, the question about surplus space. I believe the most current detail that you have is a more accurate indication of our surplus space. Certainly 52,000 or 51,597 square feet of surplus is substantial. But that surplus is all engaged basically in this project and in the Science and Technology Building under construction. Our projections are a 2% rate of growth, a very modest, minimal rate of growth in comparison to our historical pattern of growth. Will eliminate all of our surplus 5 years after this facility opens. I'm pleased to report that our preliminary data for fall 2008 does show a modest increase in UTPB's enrollment, even in the face of the kinds of conditions that I've indicated that economic conditions that exist in our area. Some of the steps that we'll be taking, if I could get the next slide, please. Some of the steps that we'll be taking to ensure that our growth continues, and these are new steps that we've determined to undertake since I last met with you, are increased retention programming. We're very impressed with the AVID program as it's being used in Ector County Independent School District and throughout other districts in the state of Texas. I've talked with Jim Nelson, CEO of AVID, and he's offered for UTPB and Odessa College to be two of their experimental higher education institutions that may adopt the AVID program. I think that's exactly what UTPB needs, and I'm delighted to be among the first institutions to be using that program. We're going to continue to expand our community college articulation agreements. We've reached out to every community college in Texas and in the process of executing agreements, transfer agreements with all of those community colleges, some of which are in hand. And we anticipate substantially broadened recruitment to the rest of Texas high schools so that we can increase the proportion of students from other parts of Texas to West Texas. With the West Texas oil economy the way it is, we believe that it's an appropriate place for Texans to invest their time, efforts, and energy. So we believe that all three standards will be met within short order, with the exception, of course, of the cost, but we've offered a rationale for that. I'll be happy to respond to any comments or questions.
David, I have a question that really comes out of my experience as a director of the Creativity and Culture Program at the Rockefeller Foundation in New York. We funded arts organizations all over the world, and I was struck by the size of the auditorium, 1,800 seats. In a community that size, that's a very large space to fill. And I was wondering what sort of analysis you did about how many how many nights a year this space would have to be open, what kind of shows you have to bring in order to make it economically feasible, because even in large cities like New York and Los Angeles, Chicago, it's very hard to fill an 1,800 seat auditorium night after night after night.
We don't expect to be able to fill it every night, but we do believe that the programs that we will be able to attract, that having that capacity will make the facility economically more viable than if we had a much smaller facility. We used Bud Franks of Bud Franks Associates, who was associated with the Houston Performing Arts Center for years, both the construction of it and the operation of it, as our principal consultant, and we have been following his advice and been sharing that advice with our donors and contributors. It is the larger shows that we hope to and confident that we'll be able to attract that'll make this a financially feasible opportunity. That, in addition to the endowment that we already have $4 million in hand to continue to support it. Of course, we'll fill it for a variety of university events in addition to those paid shows, Broadway shows that will be coming. We'll be filling it for, of course, our commencements, our lecture series, and a variety of other events at the university as well. This has not been, it's not my judgment that this facility will have an adequate number of shows to be able to make it financially viable. In fact, the downsizing from 2000 has raised serious concerns throughout the community as to whether we'll be able to attract those shows. But Bud and others continue to tell us that this is an ideal number, perhaps not as good as the 2000 that was originally planned, but is nonetheless an ideal number. We anticipate being able to attract shows in transit from either the West Coast or the East Coast, the Dallas market, and pick them up on weekday performances while they're moving from one location to the other. We feel fairly confident that this is going to be a workable size. Thank you for the question.
I actually had the same question as the commissioner. Do we ever see any of the information, in terms of the economic impact and or the financial payback from the outsourcing, if you will, of this venue? Do we get that information?
I'm not sure that you have that information. I can certainly get it to you, but we have done a fairly significant economic analysis of the shows. They're projected to be there, the revenues that they're projected to generate, the operating deficit that we expect to incur, but meeting that operating deficit with the endowment that we'll have in place.
How big of an endowment do you have to have? I've heard you say you were going to raise another 4 to 8. Did you say all of that was going to be committed to the endowment?
Yes, sir.
And how large an endowment? And I assume that's a 4.5% distribution rate. If you look at the standard U2, I mean, so if you look at the operating costs on the facility, is there a minimum size of endowment you're going to have to raise to be able to cover that?
Well, we're looking at a $12 million endowment that should produce about $600,000 a year in underlying operating revenues.
Other questions?
What about a lot of these drivers are certainly valid. I'm curious if you can quantify those drivers. How much, for example, did the estimated premium on hourly wages for craftsmen, et cetera, and renovations. Can you tell me how much that added to the park cost?
I don't have that figure with me directly. I've got Gary Bernard of OFPC who's here with me. I'm not sure that Gary has those figures either, but the Bora Associates and Hunt Construction developed those costs looking at the existing local market. They were done in detail, and when the per diem was added, it produced the cost that it said that it did. But I don't have those exact numbers with me today. We have used the very best architects and very experienced construction managers to produce the kind of information that we need for this project. Gary, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry.
Come on up, Gary.
I don't have the numbers with me either. Dave was supposed to be here, Dixon, to do the Austin project, and he is our project manager within OFPC, our program manager, executive director. I don't currently have the information. I've heard different numbers, and I hate to say something that I don't know is factual or not. It's significant, I know that, but I don't know exactly what the numbers are.
This is why Elaine and I on our task force have been dealing with the whole issue of what are our guidelines on cost per square foot. We've seen construction inflation over the last 4.5 years that we haven't seen in over a generation. I think these are valid points on these drivers and these project costs. But just as a sidebar here, it's always be helpful when we've got a project that's over our range to understand what that premium equates to. Thirdly, though, we're really struggling to define a really valid guidelines on cost per square foot. We have one example in our book. We just approved a music facility at A&M Commerce that while it was only $320 a square foot, the range that it fell in actually is a range that exceeds the cost on this project. So, what's the difference between a performing arts center and a musical and the type of construction that goes into the music facility at A&M Commerce? I'm sure there are some differences, but I don't know that range, which went up to it was over $400. Yeah, $409 on the music facility. What makes that range any more valid than the range that maxes out at $276 on this performing arts center? I think we've seen just through the beginning of this year, we've seen an average of 30% construction inflation. Of course, that varies according to the type of construction. But I'm not picking on this project. I'm really pointing out we as a strategic planning committee really kind of have a challenge on making these costs. And let me point out, the costs we're talking about here are just the building costs, which is 47% of the overall budget. It's less than half. So you're really talking about at the end of the day, not just a piece of savings, but really spending $800 a square foot when they're all in with soft costs, FF&E, etc. And that's true of every project. It's not just this project.
No, sir.
Break out and look at the hard cost per square foot. So, this is why our facilities approval task force is doing some research on it. This is why we're struggling to try to come up with a better best practices, so to speak, guideline.
Well, certainly, sir, if we were, I was unaware that you wanted the costs, the hourly costs of the trades involved. We certainly have that information available and can provide it to you, and would have been happy to provide it to you in advance. Our concern is that with each passing day, these costs appear to be going up within our area. I wish I could say that they weren't, but they are. We downsized the project substantially. We have looked for other cost savings. I'm optimistic that in the contingency funds that are indicated, that we will be able to include the academic portion. We have reduced the academic space, but yet maintained the academic function in this facility. We will be using the recital hall for our own music program, and in other spaces as appropriate for our own music program. The only difference is we'll maintain operating our faculty offices and our student studios in a metal temporary building that we have on the main campus in order to move this project forward. 7 miles is all that separates this facility from our main campus, and it seems to us to be a workable arrangement.
Well, to be fair, the question I posed is not one that I sent to staff ahead of time, so no one had a heads up, but really what I was interested in wasn't really specific hourly wage rates so much as what all these drivers taken in total add as a percentage to the total construction cost.
In the building, the Science and Technology building that you previously approved, we're facing the same problem. We've taken all the funds that the legislature gave us for that project, which included renovation funds in our main Mesa building, and put it into the Science and Technology project, and still have 7 laboratories that are planned to be shelled out unless we can recoup through value engineering those necessary costs. I'm told by colleagues, and I'm sure you are too, colleagues all over the state, that construction costs are simply escalating at rates that, as you put it, we've not seen before.
That's why I point out, the music building in Commerce, that while it had a lower cost per square foot, we viewed it in a different range than this range. And can you speak, Susan, to why?
It was in a classroom general because it has more classroom space in it, so it's over 50 category. It was in a classroom construction or classroom general type of space.
It's got both performance and classroom space. Which I would have thought, if anything, would have been less than less. But yet it's a much broader range. Starts lower, finishes higher.
And part of that has to do with all the classroom spaces now, wireless buildings and all that kind of stuff.
I'm just, this project is a good example on why I think we as a coordinating board need to continue trying to find better benchmarks on cost per square foot in the historical ever-inflating range that we've been using, because it didn't really provide us a good guideline, didn't provide y'all a good guideline. One clarification, the $4 million you referred to, you've raised $20 million already.
Yes,
sir. At hand.
Yes, sir.
So 16 is actually going towards construction, and 4 is being set.
4 is being set aside for the endowment. The main performance space has not been, there is no name associated with that space. We're engaged in a campaign at this time for a potential donor or donors for that space. We have not initiated at all the smaller gift fundraising, and we expect to do that shortly. And the advice that we've received is that approximately another $4 million can be raised through smaller gifts as we go through the actual construction of the project.
To enhance the endowment, David?
Yes, it will all go to the enhancing endowment.
That's above and beyond 20 and would add to the $4 million.
That's correct. That's correct. Approximately $8 million more that we realistically believe that we'll be able to raise for this project.
David, remind me, and excuse my ignorance here, but and the reason I confess, I'm in with the Cowan Center at UT Tyler. And,
Yes, sir.
And remind, or Susan, maybe you can help us, or the Commissioner, these facilities obviously cannot be funded through, any funds through formula funds, okay? And so, if the endowment is not built, and if you look at the net operating cost of this kind of facility based upon some reasonable projection of performances, whether it's a 60% assumption that you're going to get those number of shows, events, or whatever, what's that minimum size of endowment to cover net operating expenses in the building?
Well, it would depend on the projected deficit that you're going to generate. I think our projections are that we'll run approximately a $600,000 a year deficit in operating costs for the facility. It may be more, but with a $12 million endowment, that will be that will substantially reduce those costs. Cover that operating endowment, and that to address the Commissioner's comments is included the shows that should be able to produce revenue for us. The Cowan Center, I'm told, and you probably know much better than I, Mr. Chairman, that the Cowan Center works very hard to maintain a positive balance sheet, and does a very good job. And I believe that's a 2,000 seat facility. Right.
They're in the process of trying to do it. That's right. My question.
Right. And this endowment, much of it is. I disarmed before I came up here. This endowment is substantially in place, and more will be raised.
Two more issues, and then we'll get other questions and take a vote. In the event the endowment is not built, how do you fund that deficit?
Well, I'm going to have to fund it out of operating funds for the university, or that's last choice, out of tuition dollars or student fee dollars, not through state funds. The first choice will be to increase the ticket costs and increase that revenue stream for the facility itself.
The second point, and I don't want to presume to ask the committee for a vote right now, but one thing I feel that as a committee we're obliged to do as part of our responsibility in the scope of the state is to look at our standards and see where are we in standards, and if not, how we address those. And from my perspective, personal perspective, on the surplus space and critical deferred maintenance, I'm fine with that. The cost concerns me. And from a standpoint of, one, is our range does it not adequately express how long has it been since we put together these type of numbers? Annually? Okay. But one, is that an accurate reflection? And secondly, if it is, then there are absolutely anomalies out in that marketplace. Yes. And I think we all recognize that. And I guess the one thing I would like to see, and it might be that we take a vote subject to it, I'm just throwing that out, is that I think what Fred was asking for is really just saying, Susan, if we've updated these costs annually, if we looked at this project and we looked at those unusual things over and above, whether it's imported labor or whatever else, it would be, I think it's almost incumbent on us as a committee to understand those drivers that are driving an increase of $110 a square foot more over the standard. Now, I don't want to presume what the committee thinks, but I do think that's important information for us to have. And I really believe it's there, David. I'm not doubting it's not there, but you know, how much of that makes up that, I think would be important to circle. And ask for feedback from the rest of the committee.
I agree with you on that point, and in addition to that, it would be helpful to understand the basis for the demand for this size of a facility.
One thing I feel better about on that question, Brenda, is David has said that they project a $600,000 annual deficit and an endowment goal of $12 million. So a 5% draw from that endowment to cover the deficit, those numbers mesh in my mind. So that gives me a little bit more comfort level on, are they going to get Elton John every other year?
How much does that cover, though? What percentage does that cover? Because if there is any deficit, it has to come out of other source of university funds.
It would come, this is a university project. It would come from student fees. At the present time, we're not charging our students any fee associated with the acts and performances associated with this facility. If we're able to bring certainly a higher quality of performances than what presently exists in our area, it may be appropriate for us to look at an increase in those fees. But we're not proposing to do that at this time. We have carefully looked at the revenues and the costs associated with this, the operating revenues and costs associated with this facility. We believe that it balances. I'm sorry, I was unaware that this might be an issue for today. I feel like I'm not as adequately prepared as I could be or should be, but we have looked at it very, very carefully.
And I wasn't clear if all of that 500,000 would go specifically to this deficit, or if there were other uses.
It would go exclusively to the operation of this facility. That would be the dedicated. That is the purpose of the endowment. When we raised the money from the donors, we said it would go from construction or from an endowment to operate the facility. And I can assure you, I can simply report to you that as we have talked to those individuals who have given, in some cases, up to $5 million for this facility, the very questions that you're concerned with are the questions that they're concerned with. They want their gifts to be to produce the value that they anticipate. We've been able to address those concerns very much as we're attempting to do here this afternoon.
Fred, I'll join you. I look at the 600,000 deficit, and I think it's a question we did need to ask. But I guess I look from David's perspective. I understand those dollars have to come out of somebody's pockets. They're not coming out of an endowment. And I know he doesn't want to, if it's possible, don't want to take those out of the students' tuition dollars. So I have total confidence you're going to find a way to bridge this $600,000 deficit. I think, again, my biggest concern is being able to for us to really work on paper that difference in the cost. And Susan, now obviously staff feels comfortable enough with this because you recommended approval of evaluation. So is there something I'm missing there in terms of that recommendation? I'm sure y'all had these conversations.
Yeah, I mean, we have talked with the UT system and with UT Permian Basin quite a bit about all of this, and we feel like they're going to be able to raise it and cover it. And we did not get into the size of the building and why, because they had done the study with the consultant that has more expertise than we do. So.
Mr. Chairman, let me add quickly. I'm saying a $600,000 deficit. That deficit may be higher depending upon the operating costs. And what I'm telling you is that I'm committed, and I know the supporters within the community are committed to raising more money to bring up that endowment. No one in our area, particularly the people who have given to support this facility, want to build a white elephant that's going to be abandoned.
They can't preserve the value.
That's right. And I'm confident that there will be, I've got a little more evidence than just my personal assertion of faith that we have other donors who are prepared to step forward to help us with that operating deficit.
Talking about naming options and things like that.
Pardon?
You're talking about naming options.
Naming options, entities that may be interested in supporting the operating of the facility so that local arts groups can use it without having to pay the full operating costs, a whole variety of possibilities, not all of which are in hand and for which we have signed agreements, but I can tell you the discussions are ongoing. Okay, other questions?
I just have one more quick.
Oh no, go right ahead.
Can you speak to the contingency cost here in the budget? You have it's at 9.55%. Is that a normal or average type contingency percentage? On the surface, it seemed a bit high.
Gary, can I ask you to address that?
Yeah, we usually try to keep our contingencies below 10%, especially when we're dealing with a very volatile market. And that contingency will, depending on how it plays out when a buyout can go into additional space as they're talking about for academic classrooms.
We hope to be able to save somewhere around $3 million, which should be sufficient to complete the academic portion of the facility. And I've got, like you, Ms. Kajovich, I've got my eye on that contingency figure.
In the projects that we've already gone through, as I flipped through those, and this has been something Brenda has noticed really the 2 years I've been on the board, is the contingencies are all over the board.
Yeah.
Looking through these projects, we've already approved projects with contingencies ranging from 4% to 9%. And a lot of that is because of the volatility of recent construction markets and how far along they are. Ordinarily, when you've got your cost locked down, here's one that's 3.5%. 8.9%. You would hope to drop that. Stage, still in schematic design or actually on CDs?
No, we're actually in CDs.
Probably have a guaranteed match yet?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, any other questions, comments?
Mr. Chairman, I had belatedly, as in about 3 minutes ago, asked if our counsel is available because in the interest of full disclosure, Hunt Construction Company is a customer of ours on 2 other projects. So I'm not sure whether I ought to abstain from doing that. So for now, I guess,
Sure, until I hear from
counsel, I'm going to abstain.
And I don't hear any motions coming out of what as chairman, I don't want to make the motion. I would like to make a suggestion, and the suggestion would be for somebody to submit the motion that we do approve the evaluation, subject to David, somebody providing us just those numbers that are what I think are those anomalies that are the drivers, okay? And I think the reason there is if it were $20 a square foot or $10 a square foot, but it's, we're basically 50% over the top end of our guideline, okay? And so all I'd like to do is to be able to show and document the unusual circumstances in that marketplace today.
What, things like labor costs or
those
materials
drivers.
costs?
Greg, you can probably help me here about it. Obviously, labor is going to be a key driver.
Sure.
From what you said.
I think those things you identified.
Yeah.
David, what the microeconomy of Midland, Odessa, and how that's driven up wage rates, that percentage of impact, the percentage of impact from bringing in labor from outside areas that's in addition to those higher wage rates, per diems,
Certainly.
bunkhouses being set up.
Certainly.
Living expenses.
Yeah, we can do that. And let me add, if I did not mention, there are some crafts that are simply not available in our area.
And I think you should also note that.
We'd be happy to do that.
I've been hearing the same thing about that market in general, and that's why I'm assuming that probably some of those crafts are going to have to actually be busted and live at the site.
Yes, sir. They will.
Mr. Chairman, are you saying contingent upon or along with the submission of the information?
Well, whoever wants to submit the motion can do as they so please, but I would, because this does not require board. This is just for committee for approval evaluation. So this does not go to the board. Therefore, what I'd like to suggest is the committee will not meet again. Well, the committee will meet again.
October 22nd.
October 22nd. So, but of course, I know y'all you're looking at a start date.
We're looking to move forward. Respectfully ask that whatever decision you make, take into consideration that further delay simply may enhance the cost of the project.
Then I think, Wayne, what I would suggest is that we somebody submit a motion for approval subject to satisfactory review of the information that we've described and give that subject to the chairman and I said the vice chairman because he can't vote. If he cannot vote, then I'd say the chairman of this committee and the chairman of the board. It would be Bob Shepard.
Certainly, sir.
So we wouldn't be coming back. Bill, is that appropriate the way we stated that motion? Can we do that?
He didn't hear it. He was talking.
Sorry about that. We're talking about.
Let me take a stab at the motion.
Yeah, let Elaine take a stab at the motion and make sure we're within the bounds on
That
this.
we approve this project contingent upon
The evaluation.
review. I'm sorry.
You approve the evaluation.
The evaluation of the project, based contingent upon the review of cost driver information by the chair of this committee and the chair of the board. If they're satisfied, it moves forward.
No, I'm saying I'm okay with it.
Oh, you're okay? Then the chair and the vice chair of this committee.
No.
No. Well, he said he's okay now.
I'm okay
You're
with the suggestion. I'm not okay.
Okay, then I go back to my original
Okay.
chair thing.
Chair.
The chair.
So would it be in the nature of the committee delegating
Yes,
to the
yes.
two chairs?
Chair of this committee and the chair of the board.
Is there a reason? I'm sure there is. What is the reason for that delegation as opposed to taking action?
I really just wanted to make a really unique kind of motion. We want to evaluate the cost drivers that send this over that does not meet criterion that the board has set on the cost. Cost per square foot.
We talked about there's cost drivers. What we're asking is, can they provide us with
More detailed
analysis that provides us what drives that up over 50% over the top end of the guidelines. And what I'm saying, Bill, is we acknowledge it. We understand the anomalies of that market. It's just that I think to take that type of widespread over the guidelines, we need to document that to show what is happening in that marketplace. So if that would be make a motion subject to the two chairs' approval so that we don't delay UT Permian Basin in terms of proceeding with the project because of continued cost escalations.
And even once you and the chair of the board reach a conclusion, this issue would still come before the board?
No, we're giving
at
it
the
the okay. No, I didn't send it to
This is within the
the...
committee's authority.
What if we were subject to the receipt of the information, receipt and evaluation instead of approval? Would that help?
What's happening at that point is the committee is still delegating certain functions to two board members. I'm less comfortable with that delegation, frankly, than with the contractual delegation where either the committee, the AOC, for example, or the whole board sees all aspects of an RFP and it's simply the dotting of I's and crossing of T's on a contract. But is there no way for the board, for this board's committee to reconsider this after that cost driver information has been made available to it?
There's concern on the timing of that. This committee won't meet for another month. We won't
Your
meet till
telephone call?
October 22nd.
So we can have, don't you have a form?
Bill, what if the committee were to receive the same information the chair of the board and the chair of the committee received? So that if they had questions of concerns, they could share that with the chair and both chairs.
Do that, and then set up, I heard somebody mention a telephonic conference. It might even be a 5-minute one, so long as we post notice that that telephonic conference will occur. I would think that would be the more prudent way to go.
And what's the posting time?
7 days, which translates really into 9 days.
So we could post that today, knowing the information's going to be here, and then go ahead and schedule a call.
Or a week from Thursday.
David, is that would be Thursday?
That would, as of right now, that would be the only item to be posted, so it'd be a very quick teleconference.
But you have to have quorum.
You need to have a quorum for the committee to take action, but one of the ways that we could do the teleconference is because the quorum cannot be assembled in any one geographic location, which I am presuming to be the case, given the short notice.
So we just need to make sure that, Fred, you can't be involved in it, that it's 1
You
to
got at
3.
least 3. They can be there.
Yeah, 3 is
What's the date of Thursday?
The
25th.
Thursday week.
That's time.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Let me reiterate. I hear the board's concern, the committee's concern about evidence of cost drivers. I too have a concern that if by some circumstance this project is delayed any further, those cost drivers may go up even more. We are producing an endowment to underwrite the costs of this project. No one wants this project to cost any more than it absolutely does. One of the ways in which we have generated that endowment is by the enhanced capabilities of the facility. The donors, I hesitate to, never saw that they were paying for certain kinds of things, but certainly they were attracted to those assets. So it's a combination of the quality of the assets the donors are supporting and the cost drivers in the economy and the lack of certain kinds of things. We'll be happy to provide a fully detailed report. But if the committee could possibly see its way on approving this project, I'd be grateful.
Susan, if they were to fill out the rest of the academic classrooms, because y'all are looking,
We certainly hope to be able to do so.
would that swing it at all more towards the other category?
Yes, that would increase, yes, because it would increase the amount of square footage, because right now that's not in there. So the increase, as long as they kept the cost within the same cost parameter and increased the amount of space, the dollars per square foot would go down.
But I mean, would it swing it in terms of being categorized in academic general versus auditorium, new construction auditorium theater is my point. I'm asking.
So that's 10,000. It would still be less than half classroom space.
Where are we with the motion? The motion's been made and not seconded. So
Right.
It's yeah, that was kind of complex.
Can I ask one more question? Susan, we've asked a lot of questions, and David, thanks for your patience and indulgence with us. We debated this today, but when you walk the committee, obviously, despite a $390 per square foot price relative to the guidelines you've given us, staff has provided this committee with a recommendation to approve the evaluation. So I guess what I'd like to know is, what's the difference in what we're interpreting and the basis for your recommendation to our committee?
Okay, because you're only approving an evaluation, this goes forward. They have gotten approval for the TRB, so they've basically gotten approval to build the building. The evaluation, basically we're saying that we've done the evaluation, here's where we find issues that if it was coming for a total approval to the board, would be approvals. But because it's over half TRB, it becomes an evaluation, only approval of the evaluation that gets sent forward to the governor's office and the legislature. So basically, the coordinating board doesn't really have the authority to say yes or no, you can build a project, you can't build a project. We are in the loop as an evaluation to let the legislature know where this project may have issues.
What we would do is we would approve this evaluation with the representation of where it did not meet.
It did not meet, right, where it did not meet criteria, and the explanation that goes with where it did not meet the criteria.
Our evaluation would be a lot more complete if we had this information, and that's really primarily for our own. We need it.
Could I offer some friend of the court? For no other reason, I have a 524.
What's the spread for next week?
Tech by a lot, I'm sure. I'm sitting here listening to the conversation, and several points. One, I agree that the thing's not going to get any cheaper. Number two, I think the problem with a lot of these cost ranges is they're very narrow, specific kinds of project types, and very rarely do we bring to you typical specific projects. And I would say a performing arts center certainly is not an auditorium. It's kind of toward a theater, but a performing arts center is a very, very expensive project to begin with. And I don't know how old, when was the last theater auditorium project got approved at $276 a square foot?
Last year.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I shot that one out of the water. Forget that. Yeah. Because I was thinking, because the 409 for a general classroom building, that sounds, so I would say that it just looks to me like what we've got is a project that doesn't quite fit the mold, and the $390 a square foot, because Tech was looking at its own performing arts center, does not strike me as sort of out of the ordinary. And I can assure you, even in Lubbock, all of our good construction guys have headed down to the Permian Basin to work in the oil fields at $75 or $80 an hour. That finding any construction trades, let alone qualified ones or the ones you need to do that acoustical and finish work, are very difficult. And it's probably $70 or $80 a day per diem, because that's what we're paying for a couple of specialty trades in the Lubbock area. And I'll shut up, but it just looked to me like there was. This is a very kind of unusual project not fitting that mold.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I move that we approve the evaluation and ask that they submit post-haste the detailed cost breakdown of the drivers to show what the total increase was?
A motion for approval of evaluation with agreement to provide supplemental information detailing cost drivers. Second by Ms. Phillips. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed. And one abstained by Mr. Hillard.
Yes, Chairman, we'll have those figures to you as soon as possible. Shall I work with Ms. Brown to be sure that they're submitted to you in a format that you find acceptable?
Great. David, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate you, sir.
Thank you for your patience.
I think it's very good, Fred, as I remember a couple of years ago, we had a similar situation with the unique market up in San Antonio. And our delay cost the project to go way up. I remember that. So this is better. A better choice.
Well, it's a good discussion. So, next request is University of Houston to purchase Bayou Oak student housing. DeWitt Boncatel with the University of Houston is here to provide an overview of the project.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, staff, pleased to bring this project to your attention. It's still there. Good. We had extensive landscape damage. We lost lots and lots of trees. We had a couple of roofs peeled back. But a lot of the work that was done with Allison as mitigation measures seemed to have worked. So we had very little flooding. The buildings that flooded previously were bone dry this time, but the campus looks devastated because of the landscaping losses.
I heard you lost half your trees.
Yes.
So sad.
So, thank you for asking. Sorry. This actually was a project I worked on personally as a project manager several years ago. It was done as a design build in 2002, 2003. American Campus Communities was selected to build the project. I wrote the program for the project. It's actually built at the 500-year floodplain level after the FEMA drawings were done after Allison. So it's 1.5 feet above that 500-year floodplain level. Because we've strengthened our design guidelines and our performance specs, this project actually has stuff that typically would not be found in a commercial housing project. It was built for $20.1 million, and we anticipate acquiring it for $21 million 5 years later. And I can walk through every single one of the bullets up there, but I would suggest that given the fact that this project is well within the guidelines of the system, the coordinating board for cost of housing, it meets all of the criteria within the systems, and we would strongly urge your support for its acquisition. I can go through the slides if you quickly run through them.
Meets all the board standards.
Yes, it does indeed.
Second by Ms. Mendoza. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. All those opposed with the same sign. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have another item for you.
Yeah, one more, and that is for the W. Robertson Smith Pavilion in the stadium.
This project is peanuts compared to the one you approved previously. Again, it falls well within the unit costs for projects. We have in hand the two principal gifts for the project. This project will also have $5 million worth of HEAF funding, which will be used to build classrooms and hybrid testing facilities, which is one of the greatest areas of growth on campus. We are finding that students going through hybrid programs actually have better retention and graduation rates than those going through the traditional program. So we are building hybrid testing facilities with all of our new academic buildings. And of course, the intent here is to bring academics into what is typically not considered a part of a stadium expansion. Hence the name the original name was the North End Zone project, but now it's being referred to as a pavilion because it will have both recreational and academic program elements to it. We are also expecting that with the relocation of several administrative functions of the athletics department to this space in the current alumni athletics building will be given over to the institution to become ENG space. Again, this project falls within the guidelines established by the coordinating board for costs, and I'm happy to say that enrollments at UH, based on the cutoff dates, will be projecting in excess of 6% in terms of growth in enrollments. So we look forward to building this project and funding it with both gifts and revenues from sale and of seats for sports events. We are not in the top 10 yet, but we hope to get there soon.
Any questions? No, I can have a motion for approval. Second by Lynn. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by the same sign. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Agenda item 2F is consideration of the recommendation of the board to approve the mission-specific formula funding special report for the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. And Susan, is somebody going to make a presentation of this? Or
We're just going to tell you about it. It's very brief, and then we have Eddie Cannon from the staff is here to answer any questions.
You know, we're counting patients, isn't it?
Yes, it is exactly how we're counting patients. In the prior biennium, MD Anderson Cancer Center has always received their funding based on the number of new cancer patients. They use a California model where it used some counts from California and some national counts to do that. They have set up a Texas center, and for this past biennium, for the 08-09 biennium, they started using the Texas center. We did a report looking at how that worked, and it worked fine. We're recommending to continue this use, and this is basically a 3-page report saying this is what we looked at and this is where it came from. As I said, Ed Buchanan is here to answer any questions.
Any questions for Deb? Could I have a motion for approval? Elaine, second.
Second.
Ms. Phillips, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by the same sign. Agenda item 2G is consideration of recommendation of the board to approve the 2008 regional plan for Texas higher education. And Janet Binky is going to make a presentation.
Good afternoon. I'll be discussing with you the things that are included in the regional plan. I think you've all received copies of that rather extensive document already, and perhaps have had time to look at it. The purpose of the plan is to respond to a statute that requires us to provide regional data related to higher education and to examine educational attainment by people in the various regions, and to see attendance patterns of those people who attend outside their region, and also to examine program availability by region. So those are the primary things that this report does. What we've tried to do is organize the report in a manner that kind of steps through the various pipeline segments with our data. And so we start with population, which is really important to anything related to education. Then we look at the 7th grade cohort, which I know we've looked at before, but we look at it by region, which will offer some interesting observations, I think, for you. And then we do the other things like enrollment of the residents from the region and also of the institutions, and then we move on to jobs for the students in the region. So next slide. This is a way of presenting the 7th grade cohort to kind of show you some of the differences between the regions, and the slide uses the statewide rate as the baseline. Anything that's either 2 percentage points above or below the statewide level is either marked in green or red appropriately, and then the kind of orangey is less than 2% above. The yellow is less than 2% below. So you can see some differences in the regions. And for instance, if you look at the Gulf Coast region, already by the 9th grade, they've lost a portion of their students who were there in the 7th grade. But by the time you look at high school graduation, they're more than 2 percentage points below the average statewide graduation. But when you look at those who enrolled in higher education, they're actually then, once again, not too bad. They're actually slightly above the statewide level. So kind of gives you a way of viewing how they're doing. You'll see the Upper Rio Grande region, of course, doesn't look very good all the way through there. And by the time you have graduates with either degrees or certificates, they only have 12% of their 7th grade cohort still retained with a degree or a certificate. And so Northwest region looks like it's doing pretty well throughout. And the bottom line is not really exactly part of the 7th grade cohort, but it takes those who were enrolled in higher ed and looks at those who actually completed. So you can see that in some areas where you had students who it looked like a lower number were enrolling in higher education. Of the group that did enroll in higher education, some of them in various regions completed at a higher rate than others. So that's the slide on the 7th grade cohort.
Can I make one point?
Yes.
I mean, what James is talking about is a relative measure. So being above statewide isn't I mean, the statewide isn't as good as it should be. So we just need to bear in mind.
Nothing's ever as good. Yeah.
It's not even close to where it should be.
Yes.
So I just want you to keep in mind being 2% low and 2% above is 2% above and below something that should be better.
Yes. Yes. And yes, when you consider only 49% of those students who were in the 7th grade cohort actually enrolled in higher ed, we'd like to see that number be considerably higher. Next slide. This slide shows changes in enrollment for the 4-year institutions and the 2-year institutions within a region from 2000 to 2007. So you can kind of see that there's a lot of variation in how increases in enrollment played out across the state. In some areas like the Upper East region and the South region, you can see the enrollment increases in the universities were actually higher than the enrollment increases in community colleges. Some of that has to do with the types of institutions within the region, but you'll see like for the central region, community colleges are increasing much more rapidly because A&M and UT have basically kept their enrollment. So the big schools here are not growing at a very rapid rate. Next slide. This is one of the things that the report is supposed to do. It's supposed to look at students from who are residents of a region who attend universities and 2-year colleges outside their region. And you'll see a great deal of difference between one region and the next. For instance, in this example, you see that in the Gulf Coast region, 43% of university students attend outside their region, whereas only 14% of university students who have as their residence the Upper Rio Grande region attend outside their region. Overall, you'll see that the students attending universities are much more likely to enroll outside their region than those who attend community colleges, and that's what we would expect to see because they're much more regional facilities, and the students tend to go in their region. But you can see even within that, there's some variation. In Upper Rio Grande, once again, has the lowest percentage of students who attend outside their region. Another thing we look at in the report are program areas, and in the 2006 report, we very carefully examined all the program areas that we identified as being high demand programs. We looked at the areas where students are getting the most degrees and identified the ones. You'll see we use the same standard here, like ones who got certificates of 100 or more people getting a certificate in a single area. We identify that area as a high demand area. You can see that of those programs that are identified as high demand, the vast majority of students are getting degrees within those majors. For everything but the doctoral degrees, it's over 80% of the students who got degrees in those high demand areas. But when you look at the total number of programs, that's what the third column is here. You'll see for instance, at the certificate level, only 23% of all the certificate programs were in these identified high demand fields. So there's a broad range of programs that are available, but most students get their degrees or certificates in only a small number of the possible options. Since we examined this very carefully in the last report in 2006 and found that almost every region really had most of the programs that were identified as high demand at that time, we did a little bit different twist on it this time and started looking at a 5-year trend for the high demand, and that's what we've examined. And we once again find, next slide please, that most of the regions have a broad selection of all the programs that have been identified as high demand. But when you look at it with this 5-year trend, there's actually a good deal of difference from one year to the next in the programs that appear in there. So looking at it 5 years is really a better indicator than looking at any 1 year, because sometimes the number of graduates in one program area and another one can differ quite a little bit. And also we've noticed that there's a greater importance in distance education. The advantage of distance education is that it means if students are in an area where they don't have the program readily available to them, but it's available at a distance, then they can have access to that program anyway. Next slide. Another thing we've done in the report is look at the increases in faculty needed to meet the Closing the Gaps total enrollment goals. And this slide looks like it's a very high number of new faculty that are needed, almost a little over 17,000. It includes both full-time and part-time faculty. And particularly at the community colleges, the majority of faculty members are employed half-time or less, or what we actually in our report to be full-time, it was 80% or less they're employed as a teaching person. But you can see to have enough faculty to serve the students that we anticipate being available from the Closing the Gaps goals, we need 80,000 faculty members. Now this is using the same standards as we currently have in terms of ratio of students to faculty.
One thing to bear in mind is that assumes nobody's retiring or leaving the state. So that's if we add 2, but there'll be a replacement factor.
Yes, yes. There may.
That's why I'm making it. The real point is to do business as usual. We need 17,000 more faculty in total than we have, whatever that number is. And so that's one reason why we talked about we need to look at other options in terms of distance ed, technology, how to deliver differently. Because I believe that 17,000 number is more daunting than Janet does, perhaps, and especially when you consider it with a replacement that we have to know that we're probably not going to be able to hire all the faculty that we need if we have increases we want, and we're going to have to think of some more creative ways to deliver higher education. Is that? The point of the number wasn't saying that's how it would address replacement factor. That's the way
it was just positions available, wasn't individuals.
You know the average age of faculty members though, so it's pretty scary.
It is.
It is, yes. And the final thing we look at as the end of the student's career is their ability to get jobs. So we've looked at the occupations that the Texas Workforce Commission says are going to be needed. They have done a projection from 2004 to 2014 and looked at occupations. Now, the one thing that makes this difficult is that a lot of degrees are not directly related to a particular career or occupation. So some things are pretty easy to examine, like say degrees in accounting. They often lead to somebody getting a job as an accountant, but many careers are not like that. But overall, we find that education careers and health careers are going to be the ones that are in the greatest demand. And statewide, the TWC is projecting that there will be a 21% growth in jobs. But for those jobs that require an associate's degree or higher, there's suggesting that we'll have a 28% growth in those fields. And this next slide gives you a little bit of a breakout by the level. These are, once again, from TWC. So we've looked at the 5 fastest growing in terms of number of jobs, occupations, and clumped them by field. So for, say, associate's degrees, you can see one of the fields, one of the occupations that they identified was in computer science. 3 of them were health related, and one of them was actually a paralegal program. Similarly, at the bachelor's level, you can see public ed, which 2 of the occupations that they identified, they break out elementary teachers differently from secondary teachers. So those are the 2 occupations. And overall, that is the one area where they say that would be the largest number of job increases, the 114,000. So that's about the end of what we've put into the report. Now, it's been noted this is more a report than a plan. We recognize that. We are in the process of dividing the Closing the Gaps targets for both African American and Hispanic students and white students into groups by region, and we'll be sending our projections for the individual institutions out to the institutions when we ask them to update their Closing the Gaps targets this coming November. Once we have gotten through the process of getting those institutions used to the fact that we're projecting what they will need to have in terms of number of students to meet the Closing the Gaps goals, then we'll be able to use those numbers in the future editions of this regional plan to say more what we need to be doing by region, and probably even additional programs that we need by region to help account for that growth. So, are there any questions?
Okay, question. Last slide, the 5 fastest growing occupations. What are we measuring there? Are we measuring demand or output? Or?
This is occupational demand, and this is not output. So, if you look at the professional level, you'll see health related. Those are all doctors, surgeons, anesthesiologists, and things like that. So and there is replacement need here too, just like with faculty. You'll have people who are retiring. So these are not just individuals, these are jobs that are out there.
So this projection does take into account anticipated retirements?
Well,
let's use a specific example. The doctorate level for higher education, what we're showing then the demand by 2014 will increase 11,000 jobs, 34%.
And some of the existing number of people will be retiring, so this would be on top of any retirements.
So the chart that was 2 charts before actually shows a demand 1 year later for 17.
I think I can help with that one. That slide that you're looking at is from TWC. It does not say if we meet Closing the Gaps. And our projection is based on meeting those Closing the Gaps goals. That's how many additional. That's a very big difference.
that would, at least in this one example, that would say to our institutions, you've got to base your planning on closing the gaps, not on what the CDC projects.
Right, and this of course is just the 5 fastest growing in any one area. I think 2 of those were in biology and math or something like that. So certainly they think that in the STEM fields that we really will need a lot more faculty members in the future. But there are other ones besides the number that's shown here. We just tried to identify those that are growing the fastest because we figure that's at least where we need to be putting a lot of our emphasis. Now, unfortunately, when TWC does these reports, they don't divide them out regionally either. So these are statewide numbers, and that's the only way we have them.
I haven't seen the most recent projection, but I've been struck in the past by TWC's projections in that essentially they say we need more of everything. So looking at the fastest growing is very important because the reality is when you're a growing state, in terms of population, you do tend to need more of everything. There's a large increase in service jobs. When we developed Closing the Gaps, RAND did a study as well, and the only thing they said we didn't need more of was hairdressers. Out of all the occupations they looked at, so apparently the state was producing many of those, but we have the plus of having a growing state, but the difficulty in terms of keeping up. And it makes our challenge for closing the gaps even greater.
Yeah. One thing that this slide doesn't show you is that only like 28% of all the jobs they anticipate being needed will actually require an associate's degree or higher.
That just blows my mind that it's so low. I thought the statistics were the exact opposite. You know?
Well, yeah, college ready.
The whole college ready thing is built on that. Yeah, and that was just I can't believe that.
Part of it is it reflects jobs that are held by people while they're actually in school. So included in the figures are service workers, where you will have high school students working in those jobs, where you will have retired people working in those jobs. There are jobs which are available even as they're going through schools, but there does seem to be a disconnect that I'm not quite sure.
I mean, I think our chancellor at ACCD uses a figure about 80% of jobs in the next 10 to 20 years will require at least associates or more.
I think this is making a slightly different statement than as I read this. This is talking about job growth of positions requiring associate's degree, not the total percentage of jobs in the workforce.
Well, and I guess that if that's true, then that's kind of what's in the last slide as well, because if you notice, a lot of, except for computer science, a lot of the STEM fields aren't included in here. And I just can't believe that either.
Now remember that they're doing projections to a large extent based upon current industry mix, which is
that's a great point.
Yeah, exactly, and that's not the industry mix that we want to have in Texas.
It's almost like we gave up on it.
So we believe that we need 10,000 more lawyers in the next 10 years. Other than guys like me.
I have an opportunity to discuss that on Wednesday with
We're not going to let Mr. Hellefeld talk about that because he's too biased.
But I want to be careful as we, produce this information that we either asterisk it or something to really point out, because this is a different message than what we're messaging.
In their, if I can just add one thing quickly, in their projections, that the one area where they think the growth is going to be fastest is among those who have bachelor's degrees, and it's going to go from 11% of all the jobs to 11.7%. So that's really a pretty big increase when you consider all the people who are employed in Texas.
Another interesting factor is, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I saw the unemployment rates again this weekend. And by far the lowest unemployment rates are among those who have baccalaureate degrees or higher. It's less than 1% if I recall correctly. And so the less education you have, the more likely you are to be unemployed, especially during difficult economic times. So there's a...
There's your Odessa.
Okay, well, it's just, it's difficult because we're baselining against ourselves and not really taking it to the place where we need to be. And that's why I think that communicating some of these figures in the report, we need to be very careful of that. To your point where you said this is a report, not really making recommendations, but I think we need to be very careful.
I agree with you. And, really, I think that this report needs to go to a group like HCR 159 because, when you look at what the chairman and Mr. Hunt, he's really talking about that whole issue of the regional economies and what those regional needs are and how we structure higher ed along those regional lines. And so, but that kind of comment, we need to make sure that that's clear in here. And I did read this. I guess I didn't pick up those slides about the TWC projections. I guess I didn't dig down to the individual regions. I was trying to read the statewide. But
I think that, this slide here where we have this benchmark of the state, and both of you all made a very specific point to say this is a low bar. Mm-hmm. This low bar is what these other slides are comparing us to, and I think we need to be real upfront about that.
Mm-hmm. I don't think these things should go out without some accompanying narrative. They're embedded in here with accompanying narrative. Is that correct?
This is not submitted this year, right?
Right.
The report is submitted. This is submitted.
Yeah. So I think
we just need to be clear.
Well, I certainly do hope that there's a very insistent effort to put this in the hands of the Governor Select Commission, because surely this is where they should start. They've already asked for it.
Yeah, we had mentioned when we testified that day, I believe, that this was going to be available following the October board meeting.
This is, we need to get this out, really soon. And I'll also say, I know it's a map, but can this do it? Doubled up.
Yeah, it's the way it got printed somehow.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I read it, and you're overwhelmed.
Yeah. And then it looks really overwhelming. Yeah.
I'll make sure that it's sent to them.
Yeah, it's
sent downstairs.
If I could just make a comment, Mr. Chairman. The first one is that I do think we should do all we can to hope that this reporting and this information that we have moves beyond these observations and conclusions that we have here to an action plan by the Governor's Select Commission. And then the other thing is, since we have this information, I think we should think, at least on my committee, what should we do with it? I mean, maybe having this information affects somewhat the way we do business. And
I think that also is along the lines of our map concept, Susan, Fred, our map where we can indeed look at regions and look at the academic access to different programs within those regions. And perhaps maybe we do in AER look at, break it into regions and have those strategies, as you're suggesting, in place to take a look at it that way. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. Strategies and even some priorities. I was struck by some of the comments in here that, some things just jump out as, well, isn't that the number one priority in the state? I think that maybe we can enhance this with some, next year, with some priority issues. Wonderful work, and it's a great thing to have. I plan to carry it with me like a Bible.
That's good. One of the things I had written down, I said, well, what do we do with this other than, HCR 159, but I said, key issues are delivery platform. I don't think we understand as a board alternative deliveries, so we don't have to hire 17,000 net incremental faculty to meet closing the gaps. Continued issue of alignment of closing the gap goals and institutional goals. That keeps coming out. 3 is, and we've talked about, what's the infrastructure cost to facilitate this projected growth?
and I've said not just on general academics, but on community colleges. The regional assessment, what Fred and Elena talked about, the analysis of the doctoral programs by region. So, I mean, we need, I think that what if, what do we do with all of those kind of issues? So,
The other question I wanted to just throw out there is the statement that talks about the majority minority population will be served through community colleges, and we just kind of say that. And, you know, is that because they're going to be less prepared to enter the four-year institution? Is it because, you know, we think that's where that population will be most comfortable? Or are we making that statement and sort of just being okay with it?
Well, I think a lot of times we make that statement for multiple reasons. They are in general less prepared, not necessarily, you know, we've got the college readiness standards. It's a lower cost entry. We see that as for the limited foundation grant that we have to get, focusing on 2+2, where they enter at the community college, but then that provides them the opportunity to transfer on and get the bachelor's and higher degree.
Here again, I
think it's a very, there's a lot of entry into the community college, and a lot of it is the cost issue.
But I think your point's well taken. We need to clarify it, because I don't think the point primarily is the less preparation. I think the primary point is access, and in terms of both location and lower cost, with the idea that then we have to have a real system where we have true 2+2, so students can move on.
Or that, you know, we have greater vision, should this population so choose, you know, to enter into the four-year institution. And what we're doing in terms of college readiness standards and everything, it's just, we just say it as, you know, one of the points that come out by looking at all this, and it almost like, you know, okay, just know that, you know, and it's just, it's not good enough. Right. It's just not good enough. We have to figure out what we can do better, to do more better. To do better and just not leave it at that. Yeah.
The great hope is with a number of the things the board's doing, between first with the recommended high school program, then with college readiness standards, and with what will be, well, this is a little later, but what hopefully will be done with developmental ed, but as it's financial aid, but we will have more students better prepared, and we will hopefully be able to say in the future that preparation is less the issue than it is the access and cost initially, and that we're doing a much better job of having people entering that are in fact prepared.
And a lot of this, all I was going to say is as we move this from a report data, here it is, to more of a strategy and recommendations guideline, I hope that we will address that very specifically to say, this is what it is, this is what it might look like, but here's what we're doing to get access and opportunity on a larger scale to four-year institutions and beyond.
One thing that's encouraging about the conversation is that one purpose should be to provoke this very type of conversation in terms of, you know, Mr. Ryder saying, well, you know, I keep seeing this, so about this, you know, 1, 2, and 3 that we have to do, that we question certain comments like that. And so I think that will help this get better and help the board hone in on those things that will make the most difference.
So what you're saying is what we've been talking about among the staff, and that is that this document, as Janet pointed out, has to become more of a plan rather than a report. What are the policy implications of all these data? And what does it mean in terms of reconfiguring higher education in Texas?
Exactly.
And how do we project the impact of all that's been implemented in the last 2 or 3 years? We don't really know 4 years from now what the result of the college readiness standards is going to do in terms of changing preparation numbers and the need for remediation.
So one of the positive things when the legislature first asked for this is it really focused on, do we have the programs in various regions of the state? So part of what we see now is that because of the things the legislature's done and the board's done and institutions is having the access to programs is less of a problem. And it's been, we're now the report now focuses more on other issues that really reflect whether the students will be in those programs, how successful they'll be, which is ultimately what's most important.
I think based on what Elaine said, that I can imagine it just makes y'all all feel totally nauseated, but I think we might look at the language of this before we send it out. Because it seems to me we're at, and we know we are at this halfway point with closing the gaps, and it was very necessary at one time to break down all the groups, and it still is, and we still need to see that. But we are in such a push to get more money to the students, and it could be that we need to talk more about students from low economic backgrounds than we do about students from minorities. I don't know, but I don't think this is necessarily that might not be the only message. What this Elaine was quoting, that minority students are going to primarily enter through this system. That might not be the most informative message, informative way to put that. Does anybody see what I'm talking about? Let's not reduce our needs to just ethnic issues.
What the committee was being asked to do was to recommend approval of this document to the board. What that means is there's time between now and then for the staff and others to address your specific comments and see if they can make revisions that reflect what you're saying between now and then.
That would be wonderful.
So that what you could be doing is recommending that the staff in fact make those changes and take it to you at the board meeting.
I'd be really excited about that.
I don't think it can get quite as far as you'd like at this point, but I think it could be closer.
And one of the things I was going to brought up some of the projects we're doing is that on September 24th, there's going to be a Pathways launch meeting in San Antonio. I didn't know if you were aware of that. And that's great. There's a dinner and a Pathways program and a team launch session. So we're going to get those local vertical team people together. So kick off the Pathways and started getting some of the data from ISDs.
Some of this gets back into the closing gaps, but it's actually back into it because some of these things are picked up. So, but David, I think really your suggestion as a result of Elaine's comments are good, and that is for us to have a recommendation to approve this with how do we package it, or our presenter, that the readers of it understand it's more than just the data, but the efforts we're making in these areas. So if that can be done by board meeting, that would be helpful.
We'll do it.
If so, can I have, who wants to make that motion?
Let's see. I move that we're approving it. Yeah, I move that we approve it from you, the staff's reconsideration of the effectiveness of the language at communicating our message. Is that okay, Mr. Chairman?
I understand it. Does everybody else understand that? Second by Wayne. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed by the same sign. Motion carries. Agenda item 2H is consideration of recommendation of the board to adopt the facility audit protocol, and there's going to be a presentation by Debbie Perez.
Hi.
How are you?
I just have a few slides to review with you. The coordinating board is required to audit facilities for higher education institutions, and so what we've done is we've drafted a protocol that you have a copy of, and basically the protocol was started in 2006 and by a working group of representatives from institutions, and when I came in, as I redrafted it, I relooked or reevaluated the process. During last summer, We piloted 3 audits at 3 different institutions across the state. They were successful, and as a result of that, we are putting forward the protocol that you have a copy of.
I wanted to add that the institutions really worked with us a lot on this. We worked with not only the facility staff, but also the internal audit groups from all the different institutions to work, because we're requiring work of all of them to feed into this process.
And what they're doing is they're working as peer review teams. So institutions have representatives on the teams that audit each of the institutions that we go to. And there's 2 components, as Susan said. One is to look at the facilities, and one is to look at the development projects and the process by which they put forward their projects to the board.
Are there any questions for Debbie or Susan?
Good work.
There is one minor change to the document. It's on page 2, the last sentence under audited institutions. I'm removing the sentence that requires each institution, or asks each institution to be audited to certify their inventory no less than 31 days prior to the scheduled audit. That will be removed from the protocol, but other than that, the protocol stands.
The reason is the institutions actually only update their inventory annually, and this would involve a whole lot more work for just a little bit of gain if we had them redo their inventory.
That's at the bottom of page 3.
Page 2?
It's page 3 in here.
Okay.
Page 2 of the document. Page 3 of
the board report. It's under A, audited institution.
It's last sentence here.
That's the only change.
Yes, sir.
Further questions, comments?
What kind of a cycle are we? It'll be on a 5-year cycle. We'll just start with this peer review process. You'll have a report each, I believe it's going to be each July, or maybe October, but it talks about all the audits that were done during the year.
Can you comment on the audit procedures?
Certainly. We used the protocol that you have before you, and we went through each of the institutions just as if it was an actual audit, and we used volunteer institutions. The first one was UT Health Science Center San Antonio, the second one was at Texas Tech, and the third one was at Texas State in San Marcos. And each of the individual institutions that participated by putting forward a representative really came away really pleased with the process and the information that they gained by participating in the team process. So the institution gained by having us review their inventory and their development project process, but the institutions who were represented on the teams really gave me back feedback that said they really liked the process and took value away from it.
Move to approve.
Motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Next item on the agenda is item 2I. This appears to be one of the rare items without a handout. What you need is in your book. Consideration of the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the review of Chapter 22 of the Board Rules with amendments.
The board. Okay. Let me wake up. I'm on the wrong agenda item here. There was an audit of the professional nursing shortage reduction program. In the past, we did not have anything in there that said when they had to use their funds by, that sort of thing, because they become local funds. So that was one of the audit findings and the audit provisions. What we are adding for the audit provisions basically is just matches the other programs, state programs that we have, that unless the amount is over $500,000, they don't have to do an individual audit of that program. They do it as part of their other internal annual audit. And that's what those changes are.
And this makes it consistent with
Other state program and federal and state programs are not necessary.
now, is it, the introductory material says that we're still in a 30-day comment period on these?
Yes, we are, until September 22nd. But right now, we have not received any comments.
We are, staff is recommending,
Can we recommend approval based on no additional comments coming in, or that comments are addressed?
Basically, this is going to go to the board.
Okay,
So it's a,
that's right.
so by the time the board meeting comes, if we have any additional, we'll let you know.
so the committee's being asked to review, to recommend readoption to the board. Are there any other questions or comments on this item for General? Yeah, but, all right, you go ahead, you got it. Where's that guy? The chair will entertain a motion.
Move to recommend it to the board. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Back to you.
Agenda item 2J, consideration of the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the review of Chapter 17 of the Board Rules with amendments. And Susan?
Okay, and this one is just wonderful. When we redid the rules originally and the delegation of authority, not where it talks about the delegation of authority to the commissioner, but during some of the other areas, it left out the commissioner. So there were places where I could approve programs and the commissioner and the deputy commissioner couldn't, or facilities. So we have gone back in and made those changes. So it's adding in the deputy for academic planning, deputy commissioner for academic planning and policy, and the commissioner back into where they should have been.
Okay.
Move to approve.
Motion by Lyon, second by Brenda. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by the same sign.
So I felt like I didn't have enough to do.
We don't want him to feel left out.
Agenda item 2L is a recommendation to the board for adoption.
2K?
I'm sorry, where am I at? Yeah, I skipped over one. I'm sorry, I'm back on the rules on consideration of adopting the staff recommendations relating to a division of responsibilities for obligations of the coordinating board and agency staff in relation to statutes, rules, and regulations under the jurisdiction of the Committee on Strategic Planning. And Susan, why don't you give an overview here? I don't know if the committee remembers this. This is where we had asked Vincent Elkins to go back and review our rules to make sure what our board designated responsibilities and staff